Today's topic is pruning solutions. I want to thank Paul Rees, former director of OSU Urban Forestry Graduate Certificate Program, for his comments. Frankly, 1 hour is a short time to cover the complex topic. Today, I will focus on the most important concepts, and these 3 videos shown on the screen can help deepen your knowledge. I suggest you check them out. Good pruning begins with understanding a plant's natural form and growth habit. I believe pruning facilitates the best expression of a plant's beauty, health, and production. My focus today are healthy structures for ornamental trees, good production for fruit trees, and beauty for ornamental shrubs. And we'll begin with ornamental trees. Here we will focus on strong structure, structural pruning, and 3 common pruning cuts. Anywhere 2 branches come together in a tree is a potential stress point. We can determine the strength of a connection by assessing 3 things: the branch placement, branch angle, and aspect ratio. For placement, check where the branches are connected and check the vertical distance between the branches. The ideal pattern is to have branches all the way around the trunk to maximize sunlight and enough vertical distance between them to minimize competition. Branch angle is the second thing we check. Between 45 and 60 degrees makes a strong connection. In a narrow crotch, bark becomes compressed or included in the joint and makes a weak connection. And in fact, that's often where we first see failure in trees. Aspect ratio is the third clue. It's the diameter of the branch divided by the diameter of the trunk. Now, this photo shows a very strong connection between a large trunk and a small branch, where the trunk wood wraps all the way securely around the branch wood. The illustrations on the left shows more examples: small, medium, and large aspect ratio, giving us the strongest, less strong, and weakest connection. When the adjoining branches are about the same size, we have a co-dominant situation, and that is where we get the weakest connection. So let's practice on these trees and rate their placement, aspect ratio, and branch angle. Let's begin with this one. Placement seems like it has decent 360-degree coverage and is a decent vertical distance between branches, at least in the area where we can see in the photo. What about the branch angle? Well, they look pretty good. And the aspect ratio, small branch, large trunk. So down below where we can see, all good. But watch where the red pointer is. You can see a V, and it seems those 2 branches are about the same size. So we may have a co-dominant situation that needs to be addressed. What about B? Well, we have good 360 coverage of the branches, but virtually no vertical distance. All the branches come from the same point in the trunk. That is not good. Aspect ratio is not good. All the branches are roughly the same diameter. And you can see many weak angle connection, and here there is included bark. Big problem. How about C? Good 360 coverage in placement of the branches, vertical distance, there seemed to be sufficient distance. What about the angles? Down below, fairly good wide angle. Up, In the middle toward the top, where I cannot see very well, there seem to be some narrower angles that will require closer inspection. And the aspect ratio is the same down below. Small branches, large trunk, strong connection, but from the middle and up, we'll need to take a closer look. So let's talk about structural pruning. Structural pruning encourages a strong central leader and slows the growth of side branches. Let's take a look at this example. And we ask three questions. Where's the leader? Where is the competition? And where do we cut the competition in order to slow its growth and reduce the impact on the leader? So the leader is conveniently labeled C, and the competition are labeled A and B. Can you see? All right. Let's look at A closer. It is competing against the leader, moving from the bottom higher. We can see a number of places where we can make cuts to suppress or slow the growth of A. We can make a cut here, remove the upper portion, leaving the side branch. That will slow down the growth. Or if you think that's too much, go higher. You can remove this portion, make the cut here, and maybe go up and make another cut here. So we're suppressing the branch to a side shoot and another side shoot. And in fact, that's what this example shows. So you can see with each branch where we do the suppression of growth, we have options. Let's look at B as an example. From the bottom up, all right, we can make a cut right here, remove the upright portion, and redirect the growth toward the angle, the side shoot. That's one option. Another option is actually remove the whole branch because there seem to be enough other side shoots to take over the space that's created by removing it totally. So we're always thinking about trade-offs between light or heavier pruning, depending on the situation. And I'll talk a little more about that. So structural pruning helps to do these things. It enables the central leader to stay dominant and allow it to grow strong and faster. It reduces the competition and subordinate the side branches. And what happens is, let's pretend we have a tree where we have a co-dominant situation. And let's pretend the left branch is our central leader, that through structural pruning, we are giving it a more favorable condition to grow faster and better. And the right portion is the side shoot that we are suppressing or slowing the growth. Over time, the left will grow faster than the right, and changing this co-dominant situation toward something like this with a better aspect ratio. When we combine structural pruning, build up the central leader, subordinate or slow the side branches growth, and also shorten some of the side branches, which will shift the weight from the end of branches toward the center. These together will create a tree that can better withstand wind, snow, and ice. Now, if your area gets really windy, you want to pay attention to trunk taper. This refers to a trunk that is wider on the bottom and narrower on the top. It helps the tree to withstand wind. Well, how does a tree develop taper? It gets taper from the lower branches. So if you have a young tree, keep the low branches as long as you can and that's going to give your tree the taper. Mass damping is something else that helps trees in wind. This is the principle that reduces movement of high-rise buildings in strong wind. And it also works for trees. And what we do is keep leaves kind of throughout the tree. Compare these two maple. The one on the left has leaves all throughout, and the one on the right have leaves pretty much along the perimeter or the crown. Which one do you think will do a better job in strong wind? Yeah, you will be right. It's the left one. Now, when do we prune for structure? The answer is begin when the tree is young and you continue through its life. This doesn't mean that you need to be pruning every year, but you should be looking at the tree at least once a year just to spot problems and make a correction if you see something. There are two reasons we want to begin young. The first one is trees do not grow out of problems. So if you have a young tree that has a structural issue, as it gets older, the issue will continue to be there and the small problem becomes a bigger problem. The second reason is because pruning is wounding. Every pruning cut is a wound. And all of the pruning cuts can lead to rot. It's a matter of how much rot is resulted from the cuts. And the research showed that larger cuts, more rot, smaller cuts, less rot. So where we can make corrections in the tree with small pruning cuts, we want to take advantage of that and do it early. Now, before I show you how to prune structurally, let's review a few things. Apical dominance is the principle behind how plants respond to pruning. At the tip of a shoot is auxin, a hormone that inhibits new growth below. When we cut off the tip, we remove auxin and buds below are free to grow. Auxin moves by gravity, and its impact is the strongest in the vertical branch, moderate at an angle, and almost non-existent in the horizontal branch. Now, a heading cut takes off a portion of the branch. When the cut removes auxin, the buds down below the cut begin to develop and the plant becomes bushier. A removal cut takes off the branch at its point of origin, and we get a more open plant. And there's a third cut called reduction cut, and that's used in structural pruning. On the surface, it looks like a removal cut. In fact, both cuts, reduction and removal, involves two branches where they come together. Reduction removes the branch that's upright and larger. And removal takes out the branch that's smaller. There's another difference. The removal cut is made at the collar, and the reduction cut is made at a point of a branch where there is no collar. So, what is collar and why is that important? The photo on the left shows a branch and a trunk where they come together. It's pretty obvious where there is a branch bark ridge. That is the bark of the trunk pushing against the bark of the branch as they grow. Find the branch bark ridge, move toward the stem, and in this photo, you can see a slightly swollen area, and that's where collar is. To make a good removal cut, we want to cut where the collar is preserved, like that. But a reduction cut, remember, we are cutting off the larger upright branch, something like that, where there is no collar to protect it from rot. So when you make a reduction cut, it's something that you don't do lightly. And often I would recommend people to consult with a certified arborist. Let's review the major cuts. Heading cuts remove a portion of a branch, the plant gets bushier. Removal cuts take out the entire branch, the plant becomes more open. And reduction cuts removes the upright portion, redirect the growth toward a side shoot, and the branch grows slower. So let's practice structural pruning with some reduction cuts on this tree. What's the problem? Well, we have the central leader. We have a competition on both sides from side shoots. And our goal is to reduce competition and allow the central leader to grow strong and faster. And what's the benefit? We are going to have better aspect ratio here and here, and that will give us a stronger tree. And let's see, do you still remember how to make a reduction cut? Where branches come together, we cut off the upper, more upright portion. And in this example, we can make another cut so we can further subordinate or slow the growth of the side branch. So back to the stick tree, with the side branch on the right, we can remove some growth by making a cut here, remove the upright portion. But what is maintained may continue to grow at a rapid enough rate, and we may have to come back and do more cutting. Another option, make the cut here. That's a more severe subordination. And of course, the most severe is remove with whole branch. And likewise, with the left shoot, you can find opportunities to make a cut here, maybe cut here and here, or maybe make the cut that's lower, or remove the whole branch. Remember, cuts in the higher part of the branch usually are smaller, so smaller wound and less damage, but they're not guaranteed to do the job. You may have to come back, monitor it, and make more frequent cuts. So let's wrap up with a quiz. What would you do with this tree? First, locate the leader, then identify the competition, and decide where to cut in order to slow the competition. Well, I would say that's the leader, and this is the competition right here. And I would probably make the cut right there. And if you're standing in front of the tree and that seems too severe, you could look up for options that will be have less traumatic impact on the tree. Okay, so one thing that I think is important for you, for all of us, is to get used to looking at trees for their structure. Look at this beautiful tree. If I'm just looking at this picture casually, I would think, oh, that's a nice garden scene. But look at the framework and learn to spot co-dominant branches. And in your mind, practice doing structural pruning to slow the growth of the competitor. And this is a really important exercise. If the tree is growing in an open area, in a garden, structural pruning can keep the tree living healthier and much longer. And in an urban area where tree failure can injure persons and damage property, it is even more important. All right, we have a number of resources. If you want to learn more, there is a 1 hour ornamental tree pruning video. Ed Gilman's arboriculture video series from University of Florida has excellent information. Pruning conifer is in my video and also in the short video. And finally, a publication and a book. And let's move on to fruit trees. Our focus here are easy access to trees and managing fruiting wood for production. Trees naturally want to grow a certain shape. For example, apples like to grow as a central leader, and cherries like to grow as an open center form. But keep in mind, all fruit trees can be trained into an open center form. And that is the best form for home orchards because the tree grows lower, it's open in the center, sunlight can penetrate through the center, and in addition, along the perimeter. Now, in the central leader form, the center is the highest, and the sunlight reaches the tree from along basically the edge of the canopy. To get a modified central leader, you simply remove the top of a central leader and it will grow into a modified central leader. I mentioned earlier that apple trees naturally want to grow as a central leader. Well, this is an apple tree, and it received the training when it was planted. So now it's an open center form. And how do you train an apple into an open center form? Well, ideally, you begin at planting with your bare root whip. You make a low cut that's at 18 to 36 inches above the graft union. And this cut is going to stimulate shoots develop below it. And the height of your cut determines essentially where your fruiting wood or the scaffolds will be. So a low cut will give you low scaffolds, and a high cut that will push the scaffolds higher up. And if in a home orchard, if you cut the first cut at, let's say, 18 inches, your scaffold will start between probably 18 and 12 inches above ground. And that is a definite advantage in terms of being able to better reach the tree and not have to get on the ladder. So after we make the cut, we'll come back in the summer and take a look. There should be some new shoots developed, and we can remove the tip in order to encourage branching. And the first winter, we can come back and clean out the branches that are grown toward the center, pointed downwards, the ones that are not productive, and check to see whether there's 360-degree coverage, if there's good vertical distance between them, and continue that process for the next 2, 3 years, and that will give us a good framework. Well, what if you miss your chance at planting? You did not watch this webinar early enough. Well, let's look at these young trees as examples. This is a peach. You can see three pretty strong shoots, one in the middle, two on the sides, and the one in the middle, I can see easily maybe 4 or 5 side shoots coming off of the area where the blue tag is. So if I were lowering this tree and opening up the center to change it into more of an open center form, I would cut this somewhere around here to a strong side shoot, probably somewhere just above this blue tag. And I would do the same thing with these two side branches, making cuts to a side branch, maybe somewhere around here. Uh, the middle one is an apple that has had pretty severe deer damage. The 4 remaining branches, one shows damage right here. I would remove this one. And with these 3, I would severely shorten the branch, probably cut it to half the length to force more shoots developing that are lower. And from those new shoots, I would choose my scaffold or the main fruiting branches. Now, C is a cherry. and it has four grafted varieties on the rootstock, and they're tagged with the different color flags. So in this instance, each one or each graft should be treated as its own unit. And if I want to open up the center, I'm just going to shorten the branches that are grown toward the center and encourage growth toward the outside. And I can also see, can you see this? The darker shoot that's pretty long and vertical, that is coming from your rootstock, not something you want. So you want to make a cut as low as possible to take it out. Okay, reduction cuts are also useful for fruit trees. They can reduce height, like this illustration shows. They can help rejuvenate neglected old fruit trees, and they can also be used to convert a central leader into a modified central leader. If you do severe surgery like this on a large mature fruit tree, always plan on the 3 to 5 year process and watch my 1 hour video, which gives you a lot more information about stepwise how to approach that. But with fruit tree pruning, it's really about managing fruiting wood. And the first thing we need to know is where are the fruiting buds? Well, they grow on shoots or spurs, and some trees have both. And they can be positioned along the shoots, so it's called lateral, or they could be at the tip of the shoots and spurs, and that's called terminal. This publication from University of California has a one-page summary showing the fruit tree fruiting locations, whether they're on shoots or spurs, whether they're lateral or terminal. I think it's a good resource that's worth printing out and keep handy. So this is a branch from an apple tree, and we can see long shoots and short shoots and some spurs. And you can see the close-up of spurs, apple, and plum. So spurs are just like super compact, squished together shoots. It's also important that we know how to age wood, shoots, and spurs. Well, let's use shoots as an example. So the image on the left shows 1 year old wood that's deeper in color. And then there's something here that we'll look at a little close up later. And then 2 year old wood, another connecting joint, and further 3 year old, 4 year old, etc. So the photo on the right shows a branch that has a bud scale scar in the middle. This is the bud scale is a collection of sort of a fuzzy blanket-like protection to surround the dormant bud. So when the season begins and growth begins, these scales fall off and leave the scars as a marker, and that helps us to age the branch. So if you look at this branch here, do you think the left side or the red side is newer wood? But these are your clues. You can tell by the color, and if you're in front of the branch, you can tell by the thickness of the skin. Okay, so the left side is the younger wood. Well, let's look at how we manage fruiting spurs. Not all trees have fruiting spurs, but apple, cherry, plum, and pears have them. And if you have a tree that fruit on spurs, your job of pruning is so easy. Because these spurs live for a long time, they can stay productive with very little care. The main thing is to reduce the overhead shade so they have plenty of light, and that will allow them to grow well and bear fruit. So here is an example of a really robust, well-grown spur. And here is an example of a spur that's grown in too much shade and not very productive. In the situation of one that's weak, you could try to tip the head, just remove a little bit of the top, and see if that would not stimulate some growth down below to rejuvenate it. We can also help the tree make more spurs by doing these two things. The first one is you can head back shoots to one or two buds, and that may encourage new spurs. And then the second thing is you can take some of the shoots and that are pointed straight up, vertical ones, and bend them over, and that may encourage new spurs for developing. Now let's look at how do we manage fruiting shoots. These are the fruiting wood that grew last year. And in general, most of the trees, we're removing about 20% of last year's shoots. But with peach and nectarine, we're removing about half of them. So these are the general rules that you would use. Look at the shoots on your fruit tree. The ones that are vigorous, vertical, kind of scary looking, they are what we call water sprouts. Um, you have three choices. You can remove them completely, you can cut it to one bud, or you can bend it down to redirect the energy and make it more productive. With other shoots, the normal non-water sprout shoots, and by that I mean the ones that are grown more at an angle, not vertical. Maybe they haven't grown a whole lot. They're not nearly as vigorous and they don't gain the same length as the water sprouts do. We decide what to do with them based on how much they grew last year. So if a shoot had grown quite a lot, 10 inches or more last season, you shorten it to just a few buds, two, three, four, you decide. And if you have a shoot that's moderate or weaker, and by that I mean it didn't grow that much, and it also growing at an angle, then you can leave them alone and they will be productive on their own. Now, when is a good time to prune? Well, you can prune fruit tree in the winter and the summer, but any time is a good time to take out portions that's dead, disease, damaged. When we prune in the winter, we will stimulate growth, vigorous growth in response to that pruning cut come spring. And it depends on what you grow and your region. Be sure you're not making pruning wounds during a time when the pathogen activities for your particular kind of tree is active for your region. Now, summer pruning is also a good strategy, especially if you have trees that are very vigorous. And when you're pruning the summer, you don't get the same kind of vigorous growth response as you do in the winter. But if we over prune in removing the foliage, we can lead to sunburn or sunscald, both in foliage and in fruits. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, these trees, cherry plum, apricot, peach, tend to have more disease issues in the winter when it's rainy, and so we recommend to prune them in the summer immediately after harvest. And again, a bunch of resources, a 1 hour video, uh, two university publications. The University of California one has that one-page summary of where fruiting wood is, and then two books. The book about Grow a Little Fruit Tree. If you're just starting and you want to keep your fruit tree small, this book gives you the template for how to do it, and it's pretty amazing. All right, let's wrap up with pruning ornamental shrubs. Here, our objectives are understanding when there are good reasons for pruning shrubs. Learn how to deal with two common problems, how to open congested center and how to rejuvenate old non-productive shrubs. And then we're going to talk briefly about two common flowering shrubs, roses and hydrangeas. A group of shrubs that are considered tree-like, like camellia, like this maple, weeping form maple, like this pieris, rhododendron, um, this hemamelis, witch hazel, they naturally have a good form and they need very little pruning. So with these shrubs, what we should do is focus on the 4Ds, and that's dead, disease, damage, and dysfunctional stuff. So dead, disease, and damage, that's pretty self-explanatory. Dysfunctional refers to something that is just out of place. So in witch hazel, for example, you can have a branch that's just going the opposite direction of where it really should go in order to have a harmonious look, or something that has grown toward the center, rubbing against other branches that are more important. Okay, a group of shrubs naturally grow into a mounding form. And here are a number of examples. And in addition to these, barberry, boxwood, burning bush, Escallonia euonymus, snowberry, they all have that kind of mounding form. With these shrubs, they really need no pruning other than if you find something poking above the frame, the mound, like the spirea here, too many vigorous, crazy shoots coming above the framework. Simply grab it, go down a few inches, and cut it in the center and call it good. We don't encourage shearing with shrubs, but heath, heather, and lavender are the exception. And in general, you can shear them after flowering to remove the dead flowers, shorten the shoots, stimulate new growth. And the general rule is you can cut about 1/3 of the length, but make sure you're cutting two areas that's still green and have the potential to regrow. These shrubs should not be pruned. The best thing to do is put them in a place where they have plenty of space to grow. And I'm talking about cistus, Hylimmium, which is a cistus relative, ceanothus, and manzanita. Well, if we do want to prune, what should we do? We always begin with dead wood. A group of the shrubs that have kind of a weeping form, or some just have a shaded center, can accumulate a lot of dead branches and leaves. In this situation, you want to crawl under the canopy and basically just use your pruner to lightly touch these branches. Any dead wood is brittle. The cambium layer, if you just scrape the surface lightly, is not green. It probably is brown. Um, will just fall off. And if you remove all the dead wood first, you'll be amazed that will make a big difference in the overall appearance of your shrub. I know this maple was pruned pretty well because on a sunny day, standing underneath the maple, I can see dapple sunlight. Well, what if your shrub has a congested center like the spirea? The strategy here are to use removal cuts and begin with the bigger, low cuts. So this is what you do. Get down on the ground, remove up to 1/3 of the branches, make low cuts as low as possible. And you want to begin with the biggest, oldest, most gnarly looking ones. You also want to take out the low arching ones touching the ground and perhaps some that are errant and go way above the framework and too long. You can do this to up to a third of the branches, and after that, stop, and you will notice a significant difference. Now, with flowering shrubs, we want to use heading cuts to encourage flowers. And this is what we know using roses as an example. Roses bloom on new growth, so we prune in late winter in order to encourage buds development. And we know there are some once blooming shrub and climbing roses, and they should be pruned after bloom. So these are the steps for pruning a non-climber. You want to get low again and remove up to 1/3 of the old canes from the base. If you see anything that's crossing, weak, take them out. Use cuts as low as you can. And with most people like to have 5 to 6 radiating canes from the center that remain. And with the canes we keep, you want to cut it to an outward facing bud. How low do you cut? With hybrid tea grandiflora, the canes can be shortened to 12 to 18 inches, and floribunda can be taller. But it's really your choice. For example, when I grow roses in the front of the border, I tend to make the cuts lower because that way the flowers are in the position uh, that will not block actually the taller perennials behind them. But if I grow them in the back of the border, I'll probably keep more in order to push the flowers higher and fit better in the garden design. Now, if you have climbing roses, you definitely want to support them to remove that apical dominance by bending the canes. And then when the shoots begin to grow, you want to tip them off, and that will encourage even more flowers for the season. What about hydrangeas? Well, there are two groups. The hydrangea groups that bloom on current season wood, which means the new growths that come this year, we should prune them in late winter, early spring. And in this group are the paniculatas. They have this panicle shape flowers and the arborescens. With the paniculatas, they have large panicle flowers on tall stems. And experts recommend that you build a framework to support the flowers and kind of lift them off the ground. This is in theory, and this is the framework in my garden. And I have a short pruning hydrangea videos that you may want to look at. Okay, the other group of hydrangeas bloom on old wood, which means branches or shoots that grew last year or before, but not this year. And that include the quercifolia, oak leaf hydrangea, and the hydrangeas with these kind of flowers, the mophead and lace cap. So these you want to prune after they have bloom. Okay, we're getting to the end. We're going to wrap up with an old overgrown lilac as an example of radical renovation. All right, here is our tree, well, shrub. Problem, the shrub is very difficult to manage, too big, too tall, and the flowers are too high for people to enjoy. This is in the public garden. So what do we know? The old canes are less productive in flower production. The best blooms grow on pencil-sized stems. So what do? We can use radical renovation, which is cut all the stems to just above the ground or to an uneven framework. And here is an illustration showing what I'm talking about. All right, you can cut it to the ground, but in this example, it shows an uneven framework. That means perhaps one branch is cut to 8 inches above ground, maybe one is 12, maybe one is 10, maybe one is 6. And essentially what we're doing is restarting this plant. And this is my friend Rob who did that at the Fort Vancouver Historic Garden. Well, there are some rules for doing radical renovation. It works better for cane grower types of shrubs, and it's less reliable with those mounding types of shrubs. The prerequisites are do this only with healthy established plants. The plant must be grown in a place that has plenty of sunlight to stimulate the regrowth. And you want to make the cuts just before growth begin, late winter, early spring. And you want to keep it water well the first season, but you don't want to fertilize it. And what are the potential downfalls? Well, you'll lose flowers. The plant may die. Maybe it's not as strong as you imagine. And the new shoots, as you're rebuilding this plant, they tend to be weak and floppy. So you'll have to have a way to support and manage them. And I should make this clear, when you make a heading cut that's really low, like in this illustration here, wherever you make a cut, you're likely to get many, many, many shoots come in response. And you're not keeping all of these shoots. We're going to look at all the shoots that regrow and select the ones we want to build a new plant. And that's how radical renovation works. Again, a bunch of resources, a 1 hour video, 2 university publications, and this book, Cass Turnbull's Guide to Pruning. I love it a lot. I think it's a wonderful resource. And with that, I am done. So let's bring on Jane Collier, my co-host, and see if we have any questions.
Hi, Sherry. That was excellent. So much good information. Yes, we do have a few questions for you. One person was worried about the warmer weather in the winter time, and if we don't have any frost or freezing, is it still a good idea to prune like your roses and your blueberries in the winter time, even without having a freeze or a frost?
Well, with the roses, actually, I was looking at my roses and they are already budding out because I had shortened the branches in October, November to reduce their moving in the wind. So what would I do? Well, I'm going to wait until March when growth really begins because with the weather it has been this season, which is the warmest December on record.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you're going to see a lot of growth, but we don't know how the weather is going to be in January and February. And we could have very cold temperature, killing a lot of these new growth. And I won't know enough, I think, until March, which is not, too late to prune roses.
Right,
But
right.
with
Okay.
blueberries, what do you think, Jane?
With the blueberries, like you said, you never know what the weather's going to do. You need to stick to what the rules are now, and until they change them. You can blueberries anytime between December and early March. So, depending on when you want to. But right now, till they really do more research, just stick with what the rules are now for those two.
Yeah,
Okay,
I,
well, I
th
have another
I think
question.
I think with the weather problems, really, I'm just being more cautious. And
That's a great idea. Yeah,
yeah, and I
good
and I
idea.
think usually it's the early spring that we tend to have more problems. You can have a snap freeze, you can have, a false spring that comes early. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
go
you
ahead.
were talking about taper, and a good way to get taper is to leave the lower branches. This person wanted to know, well, how long do we leave the lower branches on? Are we talking, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? How long?
Oh, much longer than that. I'm sorry to
Oh,
say.
okay.
Yeah, because trees, when you think about your trees, most trees, if they're in a good location and they're healthy, they should live, what, 50, 60, 70, 80 years.
Yeah,
And the general rule is you want to keep the lower branches to support taper um, as long as you can. And I know, with trees, often it gets in the way of the mower or, something else you want to do. And so use your judgment, maybe remove the lowest ones that you really need to, but keep some, not, create like a lollipop and clear a whole bunch of the trunk space. If you walk around your neighborhood, you'll see there are a lot of trees that just sort of look like a stick with foliage on
Right.
top. And
Yeah.
that's because they had the lower branches removed too soon. The
Yeah.
correct answer usually is wait until middle age of the tree to
Oh,
remove the lower
okay.
branches. But
Okay.
and how high can you go with removing the lower branches? Well, if you have a 70-foot tree, you can probably remove the lower, 10, 12, 15 feet. But if you have a tree that's 20 foot high, you're probably talking about the bottom maybe 3 feet and not, go up to like 8 feet. That will just be too much.
Okay. And talking about pruning off things, should we be concerned about how much rain we are having is going to affect the wounds when we prune?
Well, ideally, we make a wound and then it dries up. That will minimize the pathogen activities. But frankly, in our region, that's tricky to plan. So
Yeah.
I usually prune based on looking at weather forecasts, but that's accurate for what, 3 to 5 days ahead.
Yeah.
So that's, just do your best.
Yeah. And then when you were talking about fruit trees, you mentioned that cherries and peaches and plums should be pruned in the summertime anyway, just to reduce that problem on those specific fruit trees.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
great. And another question we has was, can you reactivate the fruiting wood on a really older fruit tree?
Uh, in
In other words,
general,
can you encourage kind of how you go about encouraging new fruiting wood if
yeah,
it's
in
got,
general, yes, you can. And without knowing what kind of tree it is and what the circumstances are, let me just say, yes, you can create new fruiting wood that will be productive, but it usually involves very drastic cuts. And in fact, you and I have done that at a local garden where there are these old fruit trees, and they were just let go and become something that was really difficult to manage. So we did a 3-year plan, and we went in there. Um, there were 3 old trees involved, and with each tree, we made severe cuts the first year in the winter and the summer and slowly brought them back to a better form, more production. So if you have an old tree that's not productive, the let me see, my fruit tree pruning class actually has some information about it. But if you think about it in concept, you are opening up the center and top of the tree to reduce the height, and you are allowing sunlight to come into a part of the tree that currently is dark, it's in the shade. And where sunlight reaches and where you make a cut, you'll stimulate new shoots to grow. So essentially, you are lowering the tree, growing new shoots, and moving the fruiting zone lower and lower toward a part of the tree that you can reach. So that's kind of in concept how you do it.
yeah, good. Well, like you say, we do have a lot more information on that also through our publications. Um, One other thing, sorry, I was trying to think of which one. Oh, is something kind of special we don't talk about much, but someone wanted to know, is there any special way you need to prune an Oregon grape? Now, this is the native
Oregon grape.
shrub.
Oh,
Yeah,
they're really easy. Um, they're really easy. Or I have a number of them. So Oregon grape is a cane type shrub. Really, the biggest challenge is the leaves are so prickly. You have to protect yourself when you
yes,
prune it. But what you do is you look at the ground level and see how many canes are coming up, for your shrub.
Right.
And you can shorten the shrub. You can see whorls of foliage. And if you cut to a whorl, you'll get new growth. So you can essentially thin out a cluster by removing some of the canes. You can shorten the canes by just cutting to the next whorl of leaves where you'll get new growth come
Mhm.
out. So that pretty much does it. You can make it shorter, you can make it, more open.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time anyway. But just one last thing. Someone was trying to click on the links from your presentation and said that she couldn't do that. So I just wanted to remind everybody that in 2 days you are going to get an email and it will have all of Sherry's resources, all of those resources there. And I see that there are a few more questions coming in. So if you haven't had your question answered today, just send it. Also on that link that you're going to get will be our 10-minute university email, and Sherry will be glad to answer those questions for you.
I'm glad you're talking about this, Jane, because frankly, I love it when our audience members send photo and description of
Mhm.
problem of their tree because it allows me to practice, put what I know into practice. But at the same time, it gives me photos that I can use for future webinars. So please send your questions in with good photos, and you may see your photos, next year. Who knows? So thanks everybody for
And
joining us.
yeah, thank you, Sherry. That was wonderful. See you next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.